Good morning, viewers. Today I am present before you with the topic Characteristics of Modern Age. Before I begin the podcast, it is advisable that you keep a notebook and a pen so that you can jot down the important points and can simultaneously make your notes. It is further advisable to use earplugs for listening to the podcast. So, here I begin. The first half of the 20th century is one of the most turbulent eras in the history of English literature. It marks a sharp and clear departure from the self complacency, compromise, and stability of the Victorian period. The transition from the old to the new, from blind faith to rational thinking, is very interesting. The following traits, which I will be discussing, are important to understand the modern era. So, here I begin. Anxiety and interrogation. The 20th century is called the age of interrogation and anxiety because the scientific revolution and changing social, moral, political, and economic conditions have shaken man's faith in the authority of religion and church and the established order. The man does not accept anything unless it is tested on the touchstone of reason. The persistent mood of skepticism and interrogation has increased disproportionately in want of a new set of values. Moreover, modern industrial and technical progress has given birth to the spirit of competition. Everybody wants to come out successful in the rat race, but only a few are crowned with laurels. This failure, coupled with complexities of modern life, has resulted in frustration, anxiety, and cynicism. These tendencies recur in the literature of this period also. Second, art for life's sake. At the turn of the new century came a number of writers who were skeptical in outlook and were not touched by reverence for custom and the established order. They rejected the doctrine for art's sake. They evolved the new literary creed of art for life's sake, or at least for the sake of the community. In the last decade of the 19th century, a much stronger claim to be modern was made by Shaw with his socialism, H.G. Wells with his science fiction, and Rudyard Kipling with his empire building and steam engines. The change of outlook in the beginning of the 20th century was due to the growth of a restless desire to probe and question. Bernard Shaw, foremost among the heralds of the age, asserts that every dogma is a superstition until it has been critically examined and consciously accepted by the individual believer. He vigorously attacks the old superstition of religion and the new superstition of science. The effect of his writing was to spread abroad for at least a generation the interrogative habit of the mind. Third, growing interest in the poor and working class. The year 1900 marks the beginning of the end of the supremacy of the middle classes and middle class standards of thought and writing. The sorry condition of the poor living along with the affluent sections of society aroused the desire to take collective action to improve the living conditions of the poor working classes. The poor were no more helpless creatures. They had grown conscious of their sad predicament. They posed a great challenge to the social conscience. They became the raw material of a realistic novel and drama with or without purpose. The mid-Victorian writers Dickens, Thackeray, Kingsley, Reid, Mrs. Gaskell, etc. were critical of the injustice done to the poor working classes, but they were not profoundly critical of the fundamental basis of human life and society, as were Shaw, Galsworthy, and Wells. But the early 20th century writers put everything in every sphere of life to the question, and secondly, in the light of their skepticism, to reform, to reconstruct, to accept the new age as new, and attempt to mold it by conscious, purposeful effort. Fourth, impact of socio-economic conditions. The literature of the 20th century has been greatly influenced by economic and social changes. The rapid industrial expansion during the later years of the 19th century led to the final disintegration of a pre-industrial way of life, an economy and agricultural depression. The landed aristocracy and agricultural laborer were in great trouble. Young villagers began to migrate to industrial towns and there was complete breakup of rural way of life. The disintegration of the village community and its profound human implications have been mournfully expressed in the writings of Hardy, Jeffries, Edward Thomas, and others. Point number 5. Impact of psychology. New psychological researches influence literature of the 20th century. Freud put great emphasis on the power of the unconscious to affect conduct. Intellectual convictions appear to be rationalizations of emotional needs. In his study of neurotic ailments, he came to various conclusions relating to the normal mind, which are the basis of psychoanalysis, such as the existence of an unconscious element in the mind which influences consciousness and conflicts in between various sets of forces, including repression. Also, the importance of a child's semi-consciousness of sex as a factor in mental development were taken up in modern literature. Point number 6. The impact of the two world wars. The period was completely overshadowed by the two world wars, the after effects of the first and the forebodings of the second. The post-First War period was an era of depression and of want and unemployment. After the Holocaust of the First World War, the League of Nations, an international organization, was set up with a view to establishing world peace, but the ideals behind this organization could not materialize. The Second World War broke out and it was far more catastrophic than the First World War because in this conflict not only the military forces but the civilian population were intimately involved. By the end of the war, in 1945 September, England had suffered not only the loss of hundreds of thousands of young men, but the devastation of wide areas in London and elsewhere, and staggering blows to its economic system and its financial resources. Sir Winston Churchill described the Great War and its effects on England in the 6 volumes of The Second World War between 1948 to 53, the work. A large number of anti-war books were written during and after the two world wars. For example, C.E. Monteith's Disenchantment, Fiery Particles, Rough Justice, Richard Aldington's Death of a Hero, and Edmund Blunden's Undertones of War. And the poems of Wilfred Owen and Sassoon expose the futility and hollowness of war. 7th, influence of radio and cinema. The development of radio, cinema, and television had an enormous impact on literature, insofar as the radio brought literature into the home in the form of broadcast stories, plays, and literary discussions, and opened up an entirely new field for authors. Its influence was for the good. At the same time, it must be remembered that film techniques were the basis of a number of experiments in the novel. So these were the 7 characteristics of the modern age and how they influenced the literature of the period. Anxiety and interrogation, art for life's sake, growing interest in the poor and working class, impact of socio-economic conditions, impact of psychology, the two world wars, and influence of radio and cinema. I hope this podcast proved to be of help to each one of you in making you understand the modern age in a better way. Please mention your questions and observations in the comment section below. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell icon for latest update. Thank you for your valuable time. Here's wishing you a great day ahead.